All right, next up it will be Kamel. I'm going to send him a webcam request to join us. Oh, there he is. You're on mute.
Oops. Okay.
There you go. How are
Hear
you
me?
today? Yep.
I'm doing great. Although it is not today anymore, as it is nighttime over here.
Where are you
Yeah. So
calling in
I'm actually calling in from Tokyo tonight.
from?
So
Tokyo.
Tokyo.
yes, it is about almost 2 a.m. over here, and I'm full of energy. I had some coffee, so hopefully will not fall asleep during my presentation. But
Yeah,
That's
I'm
awesome.
afraid we don't have artificial intelligence at the point yet that we can keep you awake with like poking you or something.
or even better, just deep fake my face and do the presentation for me.
Make sure the mouth keeps moving, the eyes are open and blinking.
Exactly, just you know, the whole deal. So, ah, it was a great excuse me, the talk that just finished was really great and especially interesting for me because I work in the autonomous vehicle sector, and so decision making is a huge part of conversations surrounding ethics and autonomous vehicles, and so I learned a lot. I learned a lot.
So you are the
Anyway.
weapon we're giving the AI.
No, I'm doing my best to make sure nobody else turns it into a weapon.
Perfect.
But yeah, you could argue that the first weapons are going to be vehicles because they're very, very heavy, very quickly moving missiles that are everywhere. And if your car gets hacked, and God forbid, no one made sure the proper sandboxing measures were in place, we might have a problem with zombie cars causing mayhem all over the place. But
and
although
that's why you're going to talk to us about Bluetooth security in them.
that is the plan, I have to find, because the GoToWebinar thing kind of minimized itself, and so now I need to figure out how to share my screen again. Okay, okay, show my screen. Here we go. So let me see. I need to choose which screen I'm showing. Okay, and the one I would like to
We'll take the
show.
one with passwords on it. That's always my favorite.
And that one's in the other room, I'm afraid. I don't actually have it connected to this computer, but you can have this one right now. Okay, so I think that is not it. So PowerPoint likes to split it into two monitors. So we're just gonna say this one. How does that look? Can everybody see what I'm hopefully presenting? Okay, wonderful. So if I'm all good to go, I will go ahead and get started with the presentation. So let me go ahead and just move sorry, I'm just moving my own windows around here because GoToWebinar likes to spawn 3 or 4 windows that I'm trying to manage while still being able to read my notes, because God knows I'm going to need to read my notes. Anyway, so thank you everyone for coming to this talk. Welcome to GRIMMCon 0x3. My name is Kamel Gali, and I'm going to be talking about the door no one tried, Bluetooth as a rising concern in automotive cybersecurity. Very short introduction about myself. My name is Kamel Gali once again. I am by title an automotive cybersecurity technology architect at White Motion. White Motion is a very small subsidiary of a very large Italian automotive supplier. That automotive supplier being the company called Marelli. Marelli is actually the combined entity of two former smaller automotive tier 1 suppliers called Calsonic Kansei and Magneti Marelli. They merged about 2 or 3 years ago. And at the time, White Motion was a subsidiary of Calsonic Kansei, and now I'm part of the Marelli family. So got that out of the way. So I'm based in Tokyo, and that is where I'm calling from tonight. I'm a trilingual car hacking enthusiast. I speak English, Arabic, and Japanese, and I am a rather invested member of the automotive cybersecurity industry and community. So that includes participation in things like GRIMMCon, where I can share some information about the industry that I love, as well as the Automotive Security Research Group, which is an organization that does a lot of work to help spread awareness for automotive cybersecurity and help enable cooperation, collaboration, and learning among the members of the industry. I'm by no means a brilliant lead hacker. I'm kind of a jack of some trades, master of none. My recent areas of interest are Bluetooth, USB protocol, lockpicking, digital forensics, and I have some of my other hobbies listed down there as well. For those of you who couldn't make the connection, that is me in the background picture. So listed here are some of the events that I've given talks at throughout 2020. I'm sharing this not to flex on the audience, but because some of the talks I've delivered might be helpful for anyone learning to learn more about the subject of today's discussion. I'm going to be skipping over some of the more basic aspects of Bluetooth and Bluetooth security, but I did give a talk at the first GRIMMCon in the new speakers track called Bluetooth Security and Why We Need More People Studying It. If anyone is interested in a kind of an overview of the state of Bluetooth security in 2020, maybe my talk there would be a good place to start. But also at DEF CON Safe Mode for the Car Hacking Village, another organization that does a lot to promote awareness of automotive security, I gave a couple talks, one for automotive Bluetooth and one on in-vehicle networks for anyone who's interested in learning more about those. Today's presentation is not going to be hands-on, but it's going to be more theoretical, and I'm going to be looking at the role that Bluetooth has played in automotive security historically, and I have a couple of short case studies that I'd like to go over that discuss some recently disclosed automotive Bluetooth vulnerabilities. So, Bluetooth and cars, a rather fruitful symbiotic relationship. So, in the 2000s, Bluetooth began to establish itself as a leading short-range communication technology designed for cable replacement. It's now one of the most commonly used technologies in IoT products around the world. And because of its ubiquity, it found its home in automobiles fairly early, preceding features such as Wi-Fi and cellular connections in vehicles. The first use case for Bluetooth in vehicles was centered around hands-free calling, allowing people to safely talk on the phone through their car's audio system. This is around the time cell phones began to become more common and car phones became a thing of the past, you know, very outdated. I think my dad's car had a car phone, but in today's vehicles, you're very hard pressed to find an actual car phone. But eventually, Bluetooth began to be used in a lot more than just hands-free calling, right? So hands-free calling shifted into multimedia control. So now you can actually have your music library uploaded to your vehicle, or not even uploaded to your vehicle, just streamed through your vehicle speakers, and you can control your playlist, you know, skip, pause, fast forward, all through your phone through that Bluetooth connection. Later implementations introduced things like phone book access and the ability to send text messages. So phone book access is the idea that when you receive a call and you want to answer it hands-free, your infotainment system would actually have stored inside it your call history, your contacts, and it would tell you, displayed on the infotainment system, so you don't have to look at your phone while you're driving, who's calling you, right? So this is the introduction of really important personally identifiable information into the vehicle ecosystem from a Bluetooth perspective, right? Some vehicles even had the ability to send text messages through your phone. In the event you received a text message while driving, you could enable a setting that said, okay, I want my car to automatically respond, or prompt my phone to automatically respond to say, hey, I'm driving, I'll get back to you later, something like that. More recently, though, Bluetooth has even been used to update key fob firmware. This is something that I only learned about very recently and is going to be the target of a short case study I have planned for us later. But for now, it's good to know that Bluetooth is going to probably expand the range of its usage in the vehicular environment. So Bluetooth is pretty secure, right? So when it compared side by side to different short-range wireless protocols, Bluetooth seems like a pretty secure option for wireless communication. It has built into the design of the specification a couple of different security features, such as frequency hopping throughout the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. This feature makes it almost impossible to sniff as you would sniff Wi-Fi, for example. And in 2007, there was a large update to the Bluetooth specification called the 2.1 plus enhanced data rate, I believe, update to Bluetooth. When Bluetooth first came out, it was riddled with a lot of strange bugs and quirks that you could abuse to send business cards to people without ever connecting to their phone or pairing with them. And it was filled with little security holes that eventually got fixed And then Bluetooth 2.1 introduced what's called secure simple pairing, which is a pairing procedure that is much better than the original legacy pairing, especially for devices that didn't have an input or a display to actually display information. This also introduced encryption, data signing, so on and so forth. But because of this notion that Bluetooth is pretty secure, for a long time there wasn't much research done on it, due in part to some aspects of its research being very cost prohibitive. For example, the frequency hopping makes it so that if you wanted to really capture a full Bluetooth transaction over the air, like on the physical layer, you needed to invest in some hardware that was worth $14,000. It was, I believe, even more expensive for more later versions, but you were looking at a very, very expensive piece of hardware if you were hoping to do that kind of research. But in recent years, there have been a lot of vulnerabilities disclosed related to Bluetooth. For example, the knob attack and Blueborn and internal Blue. I won't go too much into detail about those specific vulnerabilities, but I will say that anyone who's interested in hearing more about those, I recommend watching my GRIMMCon 01 talk, where I do discuss modern Bluetooth security research. So, Bluetooth attacks targeted at vehicles. We're going to look through a couple of different ways that Bluetooth has been targeted by people hoping to hack vehicles or interfere with communications, etc. I want to give a short disclaimer that I had nothing to do with the research or these disclosures. I'm just a huge fan of the work that they've done, and I'm hoping to kind of just share with the audience the fact that they exist and maybe give some credit to the researchers who've done such an amazing job. So, Car Whisperer. The first application for Bluetooth was centered around hands-free phone usage for phone calls. It reasons that the earliest Bluetooth attacks targeted at vehicles would seek to target that same functionality. Eavesdropping on the connection between a vehicle or other hands-free headset device, by the way, was the target of the Car Whisperer project by Trifinet Group. Car Whisperer took advantage of the fact that a lot of cars at the time used a standard Bluetooth passkey for their Bluetooth pairing. This research was presented in July of 2005, mind you, so this has been a hot topic for car hackers for quite a long time now. The program would scan for any available headset devices, and based on the manufacturer ID of that device, which by the way is information that is readily broadcast by the device, by all Bluetooth devices, they would dig up likely default passkeys based on the manufacturer. They would then try these default passkeys, and if they worked, they could establish a kind of a man-in-the-middle attack where they were able to eavesdrop on the conversation, and more interestingly, they could actually inject audio into the phone call. Right? It's very interesting to think that you could actually hijack this Bluetooth connection and insert your own audio. So this is a big deal. Like if someone's driving a car and you insert audio of like a police siren, right? You have this situation where somebody might be inclined to pull over, right? Because they think, oh, snap, like cop car trying to pull me over. I don't see a cop, and all of a sudden you're getting robbed by whoever is interfering with your Bluetooth connection, right? But it could also be phony approval of a large bank transfer or just kind words of encouragement. Really, it's all up to your imagination at that point. The next generic type of attack is IVI crashing. So this next type of attack that Bluetooth systems in vehicles have been targeted with target the inner processes of the system, not Bluetooth itself. So it goes a little bit farther than just the Bluetooth stack. So by crafting a custom device name to include special characters such as %X, improper input validation bugs and other format string vulnerabilities could be executed remotely. Theoretically, this could even lead to buffer overflows or remote code execution, depending on the makeup of the system. In a lot of cases, passing a simple improper input is enough to cause the IVI system to crash, requiring a reboot. And then in some extreme cases, you might actually overwrite something very important and cause permanent damage to your system, leading to a bricked Bluetooth device. This particular attack is worth going over because it leads directly into the first short case study that I've prepared for today. It hammers home the fact that even if the Bluetooth implementation itself is secure, it can be used as an access point to an IVI system running insecure software. All of those internal vulnerabilities you thought nobody would find because, oh, it's on a library running on the chip inside the device. There's no way anybody could exploit this, right? But no, someone will find it, right? Someone will find it. It will get within an arm's reach or whatever the range of whatever Bluetooth you're using happens to be. So the first short case study I have prepared is going to be covering the Lexus Bluetooth hack that was disclosed in March of 2020. So this is actually something that was disclosed this year by the Keen Labs, owned by Tencent. Right? This particular disclosure kicked up quite a bit of a storm in the Japanese automotive industry, especially because Toyota is seen as the big dog in the Japanese automotive industry. And anytime something happens to Toyota, especially when it's related to security, the other Japanese OEMs get kind of like wary. They're like, do we need to worry about this too? Like, is this a particular vulnerability that affects our vehicles as well? So on and so forth. But Keen Labs showed that through a vulnerability in the vehicle's Bluetooth stack, they could execute commands without having to pair with the vehicle. The exact same vulnerability that led to this is not explicitly stated in the summary of the research posted on their website, but some CVE databases will credit Blueborn as being the culprit. Blueborn, by the way, for any of you who don't know, is a suite of high-impact Bluetooth remote code execution vulnerabilities that were disclosed in 2017 by Armis Labs. So because Bluetooth was running with root user privileges, the researchers were able to send instructions to construct a Wi-Fi based backdoor that would automatically grant them a root shell. This let the researchers have a persistent presence on the device, running Linux, by the way, and allow them to further exploit it from a farther range than allowed by Bluetooth, because Wi-Fi does have, in most cases, a longer range than Bluetooth. So you had this situation where this in-vehicle infotainment system is running a Bluetooth stack on a chip that also is supporting Wi-Fi, by the way, which made it even easier to install this backdoor, because Bluetooth chips and Wi-Fi chips are often bundled because they work in the same 2.4 gigahertz frequency range. From here, the researchers abused the Linux board's administrative position within the IVI to reflash the firmware on a secondary ECU. This secondary ECU was the one responsible for interaction with the vehicle's CAN bus. For those of you who aren't aware, CAN bus is a technology used for internal vehicle communications from one microcontroller to another. It's used to carry data for braking, steering, fuel monitoring, so on and so forth. Most things that go on in the car are related to CAN bus somehow. But, excuse me, the researchers were able to reflash the firmware on the secondary device, which was necessary because in its default configuration, the second ECU with access to the CAN bus had filters put on it that prohibited it from sending arbitrary CAN messages. This meant that the functionality that it had regarding the CAN bus was very limited, but the researchers wanted to show that they could actually remove those limitations by reflashing its firmware, because they had remote code execution on the root level for the Linux board, which was kind of the boss within the IVI. This was possible due to a lack of firmware signature checking on the secondary board. Had such a measure been in place, even with the remote exploitation of the main Linux board, there would be no access to the vehicle's internal networks. Following this rewriting of the vehicle's firmware, the researchers were able to send arbitrary CAN data, including diagnostic requests. This could, in theory, lead to even further exploitation of the vehicle, as they would be able to reprogram other ECUs through abuse of the diagnostic functions. That rabbit hole is an entirely different conversation, however, so I won't be talking too much about execution of diagnostic-based attacks on a vehicle in today's lecture. But the technical details, the full technical write-up is not available as of now, but it is hopefully going to be available sometime in early 2021. So the second short case study that I have prepared for today is on some research that was disclosed very, very recently. So recently, in fact, that it wasn't disclosed until I had already submitted my application to give this talk. So this kind of got thrown in last minute, but it's incredibly relevant to Bluetooth today in automotive. And I think it has a lot of merit for the audience. So this research was performed by, and please pardon my poor pronunciation, a gentleman named Leonard Wouters of KU Leuven University in Belgium. He showed how the Bluetooth-based firmware update process used in Tesla Model X key fobs could be abused to eventually lead to theft of the vehicle. Wouters found that the Model X key fob, right, the little mini Model X that they give you to drive your car, responds to a signal emitted by the vehicle's BCM, which can then lead to a reprogramming session done through Bluetooth. The BCM will communicate through Bluetooth to the key fob and actually send it a new firmware image that it then flashes onto itself. But the only authentication needed from the BCM is derived from the vehicle's vehicle identification number, or VIN. And the problem is that a VIN is considered readily accessible information, because you can just go to the car and look through the windshield and you'll be able to see the entire VIN. And from there, you can reverse engineer the authentication code, which is very simple. And then you have everything you need to authenticate with this key. So since there was no code signing checks done on the firmware updates pushed to the key fob, this is a common theme in the automotive industry, by the way, rewriting the firmware to share an unlock code with the attacker's device was pretty trivial. What Wouters actually did is he bought a Tesla Model X BCM online for about, what, $70, $80? I'm not sure exactly how much it cost. And he just programmed it to send this request to the key, who would then respond with, okay, sure, because he programmed it using the VIN of the vehicle he was targeting, right? So once he got the key to trust his BCM that he kind of had in this test bench environment, they actually have a picture of it in the Wired article that was written about this disclosure. He was able to get this unlock code for the vehicle from the key and then use a disassembled Model X key that he had also included in the board to transmit that signal to unlock the vehicle. Now, at this stage, the vulnerabilities he's kind of exploited have only granted him access to the inside of the vehicle. But now that he's inside the vehicle, he can do quite a bit more. With access to the CAN bus, which is readily accessible in the Model X, you just have to pull down a storage compartment. It doesn't even take a full 5 minutes. He used a different vulnerability related to the vehicle's internal network infrastructure to actually tell the car's BCM to pair with his fake key fob, right? So it's kind of weird. First he uses a fake BCM to talk to the real key fob to get inside the car. Then he uses the real BCM to talk to the fake key fob to recognize the fake key fob as being the real key fob, right? And so interestingly enough, the Model X key fobs do actually contain unique cryptographic certificates that should have prevented this reprogramming of the BCM from happening. But even though they existed, the BCM didn't actually check their certificates. So it was kind of a so close yet so far situation where they had gone like every step except the last step to prevent this kind of attack from happening. But at this stage, the attacker has now broken into the Model X vehicle and has forced the vehicle to recognize their counterfeit key as its own, giving them all they need to drive off into the sunset as a confused family returns ice cream in hand to an empty parking spot. So everything that was needed to perform this attack cost under $300 USD. It was like a Raspberry Pi, the BCM, key fob that was torn down, and like a battery to keep it all powered. And then he could control it all from his phone. It was amazing. The full technical details haven't really been released yet as well for this, because it is very fresh research, but Tesla has already started patching the affected vehicles. I feel like, excuse me, This case study hopefully illustrates the importance of assuring that every layer of a system, especially a vehicle's security, is properly configured. While the Bluetooth implementation in this case wasn't faulty itself, it opened the door to exploitation of the lack of code signing present in the system, eventually leading to a full vehicle theft, and maybe more, right? Hackers are pretty creative. This about summarizes the things that I went over today. I just had a couple of lessons learned that I wanted to kind of share, some key takeaways from the different research that I've read in preparing this lecture, or talk, I guess. It's not really a lecture. But firstly, Bluetooth has the potential to exacerbate other weaknesses in any system's architecture. When you add connectivity, you add access. Every wireless protocol that finds its way into a car can be a target for exploit, and no matter what your manager says, someone will find the vulnerabilities buried in your code. These people are very, very creative. Bluetooth itself might not be vulnerable, but this goes hand in hand with the fact that code that has vulnerabilities inside it, even if it's running on an internal process, can still be exploited through these pathways into the open. Even if the Bluetooth implementation is secure, it's possible that other vulnerable processes that interact with the information received through Bluetooth can be targeted. When we went over the IVI crashing and the Tesla key fob examples, these are examples where Bluetooth is probably properly configured, but the processes that parsed the data or handled the data that Bluetooth delivered were not. They were vulnerable. These are great examples of how everything is connected, and security in depth is definitely necessary. Bluetooth is now used more than ever in vehicles, and it will likely remain a staple short-range connectivity protocol for years to come. As it becomes tied to increasingly important and safety-critical applications, the level of scrutiny under which it is placed needs to be raised accordingly. Lastly, and not to be grim, see what I did there, but many more undiscovered vulnerabilities tied to Bluetooth likely exist. And most of the vehicles on the road today that are running older, often vulnerable Bluetooth stacks, and unlike Tesla vehicles with their fancy 24/7 backend connections and over-the-air updates, these vehicles have close to no hope of being updated, especially 5 or 10 years into their user's life cycle. These legacy vehicles, while not as fancy and highly connected as modern vehicles, still pose the same threat to public safety that modern, more connected vehicles do. I encourage anyone interested in automotive security to more closely consider Bluetooth as a target of interest, and I hope that you all find something new and exciting worth publishing, responsibly, of course. A quick look at the references that I used in preparing today's talk. I'll happily provide these slides to anyone interested as well. You just have to send me an email, and my email is listed here. But I am all out of clever things to say, so thank you so much for listening, and I hope you guys have a great GRIMMCon. Yeah.
Thanks, man. That was awesome.
Oh, it helps to be not on mute. Love the
Yeah,
tone on Grim. Thank you.
I was afraid my audio wasn't working. I was like, what happened? No, looks like
You're all good.
All right. Okay. Let me stop sharing my screen.
Yeah. So you mentioned people reaching out to you, and KF_lawless is your Discord user ID as well, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So I'll be answering questions in Discord for the next 15-20 minutes.
For as long as he's awake.
Yeah, just about.
Yeah, so Tyler, that sounds like a lot of the same kind of story we hear about attack surface mapping, and how all we need is one protocol or one access vector to roll that whole stack.
Yeah, chaining together those access vectors, and even having an initial access vector is half the battle. So laying those out, and then we start to combine some of that with the over-the-air updates and some of the supply chain attacks that we've been seeing with SolarWinds. Think about, what if the SolarWinds attack was a Tesla OTA attack? Now what kind of mass zombie car apocalypse we'll be dealing with today?
Yeah, I think on the bright side, when it comes to vehicles, there's a lot more genetic diversity in like the vehicular systems, because isn't as like a single ubiquitous, like SolarWinds is pretty ubiquitous, and that's why it was such a problem. But vehicles have this genetic diversity that's really a blessing when it comes to security. That means if you wanted to take over a whole city of cars, you would need to individually get, full exploits on every single type of vehicle in that city.
Or you're saying not everybody drives Teslas right now?
Bonkers, right?
Just
Maybe in
kidding.
California, you could start
Silicon
in
Valley.
California. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, but anyway, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm gonna go ahead and turn my webcam off, and yeah,
See you on
Appreciate it.
Discord.
later.
My favorite reference to that is from Fate of the Furious, the 8th in the Fast and the Furious installment, where Charlize Theron is on this wild car chase through, I think it's through New York City, and they're going after Vin Diesel, and she's like, deploy all the O-Days, and then they like bring this like tsunami of cars of all different types like coming after them. Hollywood hacking, man.
O-days with cars, huh? That's some kinetic kill chain right there.
Yeah, so I think car security is interesting. He talked about genetic diversity, and you see genetic diversity even within the same model line. A Toyota Camry in 2020 is going to have different components, different software, different versions of that software, particularly as you start looking at who actually has gone in to take their patches, because a lot of these things are not still OTA just over the years compared to a 2019 or 2018 or 2017, and that's a single model line.
Does that cause more problems though? Because now we're talking about diverse and maybe not maintained firmware sets. So if there is an exploit that exists in one that's patched on one, maybe that patch does not get applied to an older version of the firmware, or the OTA update is only pushed or maintained by a certain group that handles that, and the other groups are maybe not as secure. So that diversity, I can see maintaining those multiple code sets. We've seen problems with that before in different security products, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it can go kind of both ways. I think car security is, I mean, we've already seen this as a big deal moving forward. We got ICS, we got any of these diverse verticals that have capabilities that can cause kinetic damage or safety issue or life and limb. All of these are now all digitally connected. They're all running some sort of embedded firmware. They're all going to be running some architecture. They're going to have some of the same vulnerabilities and maybe not even maintained security-wise in the same fashions that our traditional networks are. So I think we're just getting to the precipice of where security has to go and is going for these connected devices. And now that it's in cars and your home, when your toaster starts talking to your car, letting you know your toast is done and sends that exploit, like that's, the next AI and ML apocalypse is just getting started. So I don't know. It's interesting time to be alive.
It's funny when we first created the concept of the Grim Toaster. I don't know, what was this, 5 years ago? We were looking at ways to make for the Howdy Neighbor exhibit to make it even more connected than a lot of things even were at that time. And the idea we came up with was that the Grim Toaster actually has its own Twitter account, and it's connected to it. So the APIs are linked into the Twitter to the toaster instance. And we did that on purpose because we thought it was funny. It was kind of like an inside millennial joke that, of course, they would want to talk on social media about their toast. And the reality is now, of course, that we're not on that precipice anymore. Consumer devices and even devices embedded or IIoT in industrial applications are having similar feature sets and exposure like that.
Yeah, and the fact that you're getting hard pressed to find a lot of these consumerized products that are not requiring some sort of social media account or online cloud presence for even use. Like there's another aspect of just privacy in general and your connected ability of all of your devices to track you, maintain analytics on you. Like even outside of the security aspect, it's getting to be difficult to do anything in any manner out of privacy or outside of the cloud from unhooking yourself from all these mainstream companies.
Mm-hmm.
I was a little disappointed to learn my new Oculus requires a very specific Facebook account, and
Yep,
you
or
know,
else it doesn't work.
it doesn't work. Like, who would have thought Facebook would have done something like that?
I hope that was a rhetorical, facetious question. Because of course
Yeah,
they
of
would.
course they would. Yeah, it is getting to be interesting for sure.
What's your 2021 threat prediction, right? What's going to happen this year that is different than what we've seen?
I think 2021 is going to, and I think this applied to 2020 in the same way, just we're going to see it in a different light. I think we're going to start to see the leveraging of consumerized tools and the ability to do attribution become much, much more difficult. We've already ran into that with a lot of the APT groups, with a lot of the crime war groups and ransomware, but I think there's going to become a much bigger diversion of these commercialized tools being leveraged in sophisticated attacks in combination to either provide disinformation, misinformation, in combination with a lot of automation. So you're going to run into a lot of cloud abuse and some ML stuff that's going to correlate and be leveraged in these attacks to then further propagate ransomware or whatever else. So we're going to see a lot of sell-off, I think, of the ransomware and access from APT groups to kind of throw off the disinformation, misinformation, and then I think we're going to have a new strand of IoT and kind of as we migrate back into the enterprise, we're going to see a lot of enterprise compromise from embedded malware that's been dormant, sitting because of the work at home. We've seen a whole wave of consumer devices, home routers getting hacked, and I think that's going to continue as we work from home for a while. But I think that as those devices start to migrate back into the enterprise, I think we're going to see that kind of second wave of more sophisticated attacks that have been laying dormant and embedding themselves begin to propagate and show some of the fruits of that patience.
So let's break that down. First, the elephant in the room we're talking about is Cobalt Strike. We've had source code leaked. We have forks and derivatives of it. It's a powerful tool set, which is why it's so popular to do that. But I don't know that I would call that misattribution as much as I would argue that that's just the lowest common denominator to successfully accomplish an operation. Because at the end of the day, what code gets put down, I think there are very few people on this planet who can confidently attribute who they think that is from that code for lots of different reasons. And I think that the protection of attribution from an adversary perspective comes primarily from the C2/gray infrastructure of how do I command and control it.
I mean, blending in, right? Like that's the whole point. If pen test companies use Cobalt Strike, if the other APTs use Cobalt Strike, why would you not maintain and blend in? Yeah, there's going to be kits that are going to be leveraging UEFI, like persistence. We've already seen some of that, some of the more advanced mechanisms, but you always, at the end of the day, have to have that channel of communication, that C2, and something that is modular, like Cobalt Strike, and is not as easily attributed to a particular actor. That's when it starts to blend in and make sense from an APT group, a crime war group. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're going to be doing it, why would you not use that? So yeah, I think you're right. It's definitely getting harder to do attribution. And honestly, if you are doing attribution, I would be very wary and very careful of how you phrase what your attribution is.